Welcome to the Anxious Love Coach podcast, a place for creating meaningful, conscious, secure, long-term partnerships. My name is Natalie Kennedy, and I'm your host. I'm a relationship anxiety coach and meditation teacher. If you haven't yet, be sure to join my communities over on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Anxious Love Coach. You can also request a 30-minute relationship anxiety assessment with me depending on availability, or ask me a question over on my website at www.anxiouslovecoach.com. My baby's in the other room with my husband, and I don't know how long we've got. But I want to talk about how you can resolve inner conflict, and for that matter, how you can also resolve outer conflict. And whether you decide to join tension of opposites or not, which I'm going to be talking about today, I want to give you something that you can work with, something very tangible. And hopefully, if you've got like an intense polarization inside of you, you will feel a bit more empowered to know what to do about it so that you can have more ease, more peace, not be ruled by these sides of you that just seem to come out of nowhere, and ultimately find a lot more harmony inside of yourself. And what you may find is that you judge yourself and other people less because you're going to be coming from a place of wholeness. I'm currently in Medellin, Colombia. Just got here a few days ago, had a full-on freak out and wanted to tell my husband we should sell the house that we bought here and go back to the US. And that was fun. I had a real tension of opposites within myself. But I survived the freak out, and it turns out I don't want to sell the house. I want to stay here. But there was a very real part of me that surfaced that wanted to just throw everything away. So we made it. I made it. I still like my office. If you've been following me for a long time, you've probably seen it. Inner conflict. We're going to talk about tension of opposites, and we're also going to talk about internal conflict and what that entails and why it's not something you should avoid. And also, for that matter, whatever I'm saying about internal stuff can also apply to external stuff. What I mean by that is everything is relationship. Literally everything. I am in a relationship with my microphone. I'm in a relationship with my phone, but you're in a relationship with your phone, and I have a relationship with you. I have a relationship with my husband. I have a relationship with my baby. I have a relationship with my husband-baby dynamic. My mother dyad and my husband are a relationship. There are relationships between groups. There's relationships between literally everything. It's the contrast between the self and the other. And in order to define an other, we must define the self. In order for a conflict to exist, we have to otherize something. We are born whole and full of pure potential and with all of the opposites within us. What I mean by that is we have the light and the shadow inside of us at all times, and that is what creates the wholeness. So a lot of what we call our personality as we grow into adults is actually not chosen by us. We didn't decide to be that way, not consciously anyway. A lot of what you call your personality is what's left over after society beat certain parts of you out of you. Let that sink in. So that means that you are not who you think you are because you are over-identified with certain personality aspects. Maybe you think you're kind. Maybe you think you're introverted. Maybe you think you're ambitious. Maybe you think you're creative. And these are all neutral character traits. But note that you are also all of those opposites. So if you see yourself as a kind person, you are also a mean person in a certain context. And the more you're not aware of it, the more it happens when you least expect it and you have no control over it. So this is why it becomes kind of dangerous, right? Carl Jung once said very famously that one becomes conscious not by imagining figures of light, but by making the unconscious conscious. Another thing that he said that was very powerful is until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. I love this quote because it explains why so many people end up in the same situation over and over. My husband is singing in the other room to our baby. It explains why you might find yourself in certain patterns over and over and over and over, and you feel like you have no control over it. A lot of people know me for relationship anxiety work, and what they will find is that they boomerang in relationships. So they'll say, I love you, no, I don't. Or should I stay or should I leave? No matter what kind of work they do, maybe they go see a therapist, maybe they listen to my podcast or meditate or whatever. No matter what they do, they still find themselves wanting to push their partner away. The way they respond to this is through shame and trying to pretend that they want to pull their partner close, but then it doesn't feel authentic. What is your variation of the part of you that you can't stand? So when I was struggling with relationship anxiety, the part of me that I liked was the part of me that liked closeness. So anytime I was leaning into my relationship, anytime I felt good about my partner, anytime I was affectionate, I felt good about myself. I didn't feel shame. But as soon as I started having doubts about the relationship, as soon as I started wanting a little bit of space, as soon as I started, God forbid, imagining a different life that I might have taken that wasn't with my partner, now husband, I felt so much shame and I would try to stuff it down. What that would inevitably result in is an escalation of that part. So before, I might have just said, listen, I want to go to the Bahamas for a week by myself, maybe with my girlfriends. But I would make that mean that I must not love my partner, because if I had this belief that if you really loved your partner, I'd want to be with him all the time. And if that's not true, then it means I'm in the wrong relationship and ensue panic attack, right? Anytime I wanted a little bit of space to pull inward, to be a little bit more independent, I took it to mean I must want to break up. And I didn't want that at all, or at least the part of me that wanted to stay in the relationship and the part of me that I was over-identified with, I didn't like that. That was a very inconvenient truth. And so what I would do is stuff it down. But that desire for a little bit of independence didn't go away. And so now, instead of, being okay with taking a week in the Bahamas, now I'm, crushing on someone else while I do tango, right? I do a lot of tango, or I used to. Now I would start fantasizing about someone, fantasizing about an escape. And then I would push that down too. Now it gets more intense. Now I want to break up. Now I haven't given myself any permission to want something other than the relationship that's right in front of me. And it's gotten so intense that it's starting to say things like, you don't love him. Or I start hyperfixating on little things that normally wouldn't bother me, because at this point, my self-care is so bad that I'm starting to take it out on my partner, and I'm starting to find things wrong with him that normally wouldn't bother me had I just given my independent self a little bit of permission to breathe, a little bit of permission to exist. And in the same way that you really can't take a toddler seriously when it's having a meltdown, you shouldn't take parts of yourself that have resorted to extreme behaviors due to not having their needs met for so long. You shouldn't take the thoughts that come from those parts seriously either. At the same time, if you ignore it, it gets stronger. So this is the paradox that I want you to understand. The more you push a part away, the more it intensifies. What you resist persists. At the same time, that doesn't mean that when it comes time to look at it, that you take everything it says at face value. So the thing about parts in conflict is it has less to do with the story that each part has and more to do with which part you're overly identified with and the energy behind the thoughts. Another way to say that is the emotion, the emotional body, we could say, that is connected to those thoughts. So when you have a thought that's, for instance, coming from a part of you that desperately needs permission to have some independence in your life, let's say that part says, you don't love him. Okay, what if for a moment we're like, okay, whoa. There's a part of me that clearly appreciates this relationship. And by the way, I'm speaking to people for whom relational ambivalence is their biggest struggle. I'm not talking to people who very clearly have all sides of them making an obvious decision to leave. That sometimes happens. I'm not talking to the people for whom it's obvious what to do. I'm talking about the people for whom it's not obvious. half of you wants one thing and half of you wants another, and it's just like total chaos, and you're hoping you're gonna, you're hoping one side's gonna win out over the other one. That's who I'm speaking to. So if that's you, what's important at that point, especially when it's escalated to such a point of conflict, it's both parts actually have a lot in common in the sense that they feel to the same degree of intensity, because if they didn't, one would just yield and say, okay, no problem, right? So if you're in a relationship with your partner and you're like, I want to paint the wall yellow, and your partner's like, I want to paint the wall blue. Okay, well, if you can't paint it both, and it's not going to look good if we paint it half blue and half yellow. We have to pick a color here. And if we do both at the same time, it's going to come out green, and that's not a compromise, right? So if one person wants blue and the other person wants yellow, and if they both want it equally, we have a conflict. But if it's obvious and it's like, well, how much does it matter to you? Well, it matters a lot to me. Well, it doesn't matter that much to me. Okay, in that case, we go with what the other person wants because it matters to them more, right? So sometimes we have parts where it's like, all right, a little part of me wants this, but more of me wants that more. So it's obvious. Where it's not obvious is when it's an equal but opposite amount of conflict. And for relationship anxiety people, this is where it's at. It's that 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and the weight is evenly distributed between the feet, and we're stuck. So what do you do when that happens? Now, there's a lot of different exercises that you can do with this. There's mindfulness practices. You can sit with the sensation. I do a practice called consciousness exercise in my course, Both Feet In. And also I did a course last year called Anxious to Spacious, teaching consciousness exercise. That's another one you can do to just kind of objectively sit with pain. And it's amazing. And I'm probably going to do it towards the end of the year. But I'm not talking about that today. And, like I said, there's all sorts of therapies, but I'm not here to talk about those. I'm here to talk about polarity work, which is a really fun exercise. Really, it's more of a game. And we're going to be doing it in this upcoming series, which is going to be starting this Thursday with my teacher who taught me the exercise, which is really cool. I've literally never, ever had Steffi on any of my courses. We've done some retreats together, but if you've been following me for a long time and you listened to Anxious Love Coach podcast episode 1, you probably heard me talk about a woman in the mountains of Austria. Her name's Steffi. That is the woman, and she is going to be joining me to teach Tension of Opposites. So it's going to be really, really exciting. We're going to be diving into an exercise called polarity work, which is exactly what it is. You find two polarities that are equally in conflict with one another. It's not one of those, okay, well, it matters more to that part, so I'm just going to yield, right? That would be more of like the dominant submission thing. One's more dominant. When you have two parts that are equally in conflict in the game of polarity work, where you face off between parts with the help of a guide, which is why the exercise is with a peer, you're going to learn how to guide and be guided. When you face off with parts that are equally in conflict, first, you need to bring the extent of the conflict to the surface. So if you're not willing to face the parts of you that scare you so much, it's not going to work. I like polarity work a lot because for some reason, having the help of a guide or even just someone who's equally curious about your dynamic as you are, getting another brain on board, someone who's not biased, someone who's not invested in you having a very specific outcome, this can be so helpful. And it's almost like when you have someone guiding you, you have a spiritual friend supporting you. And it's just beautiful and humbling. But they are there to support you in bringing stuff to the surface that previously wasn't visible. So you might think that the part of you that says it wants to leave your relationship actually wants to leave your relationship. Maybe. But maybe it wants something else and it thinks that that's the only way to get it. Like maybe I feel trapped, or I feel some sensation in my body that I've labeled as trapped. It's actually just anxiety. And I currently perceive that the only way to relieve this anxiety is to initiate a experience called a breakup. Well, that might not actually be the case. And you know why? I know women who have felt this way and they break up and the anxiety didn't go away. What does that tell you? It was not about the breakup or the relationship, because the trappedness was a mental construct. So if it's happening on a somatic level and you're in an actual safe situation, you're not in a dangerous situation, then breaking up will not bring safety, because the threat was not actually the relationship. The threat was our own mind and the way that we shame ourselves. Well, with that being the construct, no amount of breaking up and getting back together is going to give you clarity, because the issue was a internal polarization issue, a lack of integration. So when that's the case, there's no external circumstance that's going to cause us peace. And this is grass is greener syndrome at some point. So with polarity work, that becomes more visible, the illusions at play, where we realize what we thought the issue was isn't the actual issue. We can't know what the actual issue is until we actually face that part and start to communicate with it. And when we do that, like I said, things will come to the surface that previously were not visible. We're making the unconscious conscious. At some point, all of the important variables, the things that need to be shared, are going to come to the surface. And we may find that still, right, either it's going to resolve quickly, where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was important to you. Okay, I'm going to yield in favor of what you want. And then we kind of do what that one part of you wants. But let's say that stuff surfaces and surfaces and surfaces with the help of your guide, bringing emotions, thoughts, perceptions up to the surface, things unsaid up to the surface. And when all is said and done, we're still at a 50-50 standstill. What do we do then? In polarity work, we call this a dead end. And what you do in a dead end is you start to work with the emotional component of the conflict. And this is where you start to alchemize this into a third entity. So when you have two parts that are pushing equally, there eventually is a shaking, an intense collapse that can start to happen. This is called the implosion phase. And this is where everything falls apart. This is where crying happens. This is where catharsis happens. Disorientation and chaos and craziness happens. And all the while, your guide is there. They're watching you and supporting you and staying with it. Because so often what happens in polarity work, this beautiful game of tension of opposites, is we start to realize the futility of trying to logically figure this out. We realize that the mind is not going to do anything useful here. And this is when we start to tap into the emotional component. So when that happens, the emotional release can happen. And when that happens, a third entity often emerges. I get chills thinking about it, because I remember having feelings of deep powerlessness and helplessness and futility and shame and sadness and just despair. And if I didn't run away from it and I allowed it to happen, and I just stayed with it long enough, something new would emerge. A new perspective that maybe wasn't visible to the individual parts until then. And we may or may not come to a resolution that is what we expected before we go into the exercise. But we may find that we have new perspective, a new reverence for the polarities, or a larger capacity to hold paradox without flinching, right? Maybe we can hold that sometimes we want to be close to our partners and sometimes we want to pull away, and we figure out that this is a dance and not a jiu-jitsu. A jiu-jitsu is a power struggle. It's about, squashing a part and dominating it into submission. But it doesn't work, because that submissive part eventually comes back up and tries to win again, or the part that was submitted. With the dance, it's more fluid. We can switch, we can change. There's no attachment to a certain outcome or being over-identified with a certain role. And ultimately, this is the work of wholeness. So if you thought, like I said, you were kind, you might not actually be kind at all. You might be a people pleaser. And I hate to break it to you, but people pleasers are not kind. They are often manipulative. They are trying to control situations. They're trying to control people's perceptions. They're always smiling, but underneath they're like, fuck you, and everybody can feel it. So there's a very mean part of you, but because you're not willing to own it, everybody else can see it, but you can't. As soon as you own it, you tap into the repressed power that aspect has, and you can use it in more relevant situations, such as when someone's being abusive or fucked up towards you. That's not the time to be kind. But if you're over-identified with the kind part, you can't protect yourself, right? So that's how it works when we repress parts of ourselves. And as long as we have a very narrow definition of who I or me is, aka what we think we're allowed to be, there's going to be inner conflict, because we're always going to feel that there's more to us, because there is. There's going to be a conflict between who we actually are, the wholeness, the fullness of who we are, and who we think we're allowed to be. I want to say that again because it's a very powerful distinction. As long as we haven't done the work of wholeness, there's going to be conflict between the fullness of who we are and who we think we're allowed to be. This is what polarity work is about. It's about finding the opposites inside of you, the top dog aspect, the part that we're probably over-identified with, and then the underdog aspect, the part of us that we want to pretend isn't there. But it's like a shower head where all the water's not flowing through, only half. So the water's very weak. You're a weak human being because you haven't actually accessed the fullness of who you are. And I want to say, I don't think we ever reach complete wholeness unless we reach God or we die. But so much of the work that we're here to do on this planet as humans is remember who we are. Not just stay as committed as possible to shoving out everything that's inconvenient for everyone else and ourselves, and trying to fit into this narrow window of who we think we are and who we should be. And anytime a part of us surfaces that kind of threatens that view, we freak out and think there's something wrong with us and squash it down. By the way, parenthood is a mindfuck of polarity work. How do I relate to my husband? And how do I relate to my baby? While they're in the same space, it's a total dance. And also, babies will mirror back to you, kids will mirror back to you all your stuff that you want to believe that you're not. But you are. Anyway, I have not taken the time to say this because motherhood has been very busy, and honestly, I want to spend more time with my kid and my family. But if I could shove something down your throat, that came out wrong, but we're just going to stick with it, I would tell you that tension of opposites is a ridiculously good investment, partially because this exercise is so awesome and life-changing, I promise you. And second of all, because Steffi is on, and Steffi is an incredible woman to know. And she is one of those women who is going to just, I know her, the way that she pours herself into this work with just so much love. She doesn't have a following like I do. And she doesn't have the marketing skills to put this work out there in the way that it deserves to be. So the fact that we're going to be meeting twice a week, once with me and once with her, and we're going to be supervising you in this exercise, to have this much time with Steffi it's a steal. Like, you guys, it's a complete steal. I was even telling Preston about it, and he was like, that's all you're charging? And I was like, yeah, because we want it to be big. I'm not surprised. We've got 20 women enrolled. I'm not surprised that we don't have more, because honestly, I haven't been marketing as much as aggressively as I did pre-baby. And also, I'm not marketing it as a relationship anxiety course like I usually would, even though that's better for my brand. But it's really for anyone who's got internal splits. because it's not a relationship anxiety exercise, but it just so happens that it will help you with relationship anxiety so much. But it also works if you're a new mom and like you hate your kid because your kid stole your life from you, or if you miss your old life, or if you're in the middle of a job transition, or if you want to start a business but you won't let yourself speak, right? One of the first primary polarities that we have is the desire to be seen and the desire to not be seen. That's a polarity right there that lives inside of all of us. So we're going to be playing with that, the desire to be seen, the desire to hide, right? So we need to play with these opposites. And once we learn how to do that, we can be free. We can be at peace. Tension is not bad. Conflict is not bad. I want you to think of a bow and arrow. A bow and arrow, like that arrow flies because we've mastered the art of tension. You pull too hard, the bow snaps. You don't pull enough, the arrow's like little flaccid flying through the air. A little flaccid arrow. I'm using lots of innuendos today. But if you're willing to hang out in the tension, going with that bow and arrow analogy, if you don't let go and you stay in it and you focus in on it and you engage fully with that conflict, which is really just tension, you're going to be able to point it in the right direction and alchemize it into the exact type of life and target that you desire. I want you to imagine that the conflict that you're having inside, the anxiety, the wavering that you're having, if alchemized with pure consciousness and pure awareness and pure willingness to engage with that conflict, that tension, to the extent that it exists, a third thing's going to emerge that is bigger than the sum of the parts. This is what polarity work is about. Amber is asking, how do you engage with it in the right way? By making the unconscious conscious. So bringing things to the surface. So if we were to go with the bow and arrow analogy, if you're pulling that bow and it's an arrow and it's not landing on your target, it's probably because you're lacking some kind of experience or information. So you need more information or you need more experience, aka you need to make aware some things that you're currently not aware of. That is what we need to do. Once you become fully aware of the conflict and you can see all the pieces to it, clarity emerges. It might be a collapse that happens first, but eventually clarity will emerge in some way. You may find that if you don't get too attached to a certain outcome, the outcome will actually be better than what either part had in mind. That's what I mean by an outcome that's greater than the sum of the parts. All right, that's it. Tension of opposites. We're starting on Thursday with like a 30-minute welcome call with me and Steffi. And then after that, we're going to meet twice a week. You don't need to attend all of them. You can just attend once a week, but obviously if you want to get more out of it, you can attend twice a week. And then we're going to meet for 7 weeks, but there's going to be a 1 week off in the middle, so you can take a break or catch up or whatever. Keep in mind also, you're going to be assigned study groups based on time zone and availability. And these are going to be, your friends, your peers that you can practice the exercise with outside of session. So in session, we're only going to practice one side of the exercise. You'll need to practice with a peer to practice the other side. How do you not get as attached to the outcome of something? Oh gosh, that's not something you do overnight. My suggestion is you make peace with the feeling that you don't want to feel by feeling it and not reacting, I think. And over time, you're going to build capacity to feel feelings that you don't want to feel. I'm going to go because I can hear my baby. And I'm also going to have dinner. But I hope you can join me. And if you're a Both Feet In student, please note that you get huge discounts on all my group series because these exercises are inside of Both Feet In, but they're like solo variations. In these courses that I'm offering, these group programs, we're going to be learning these exercises as a group. So you won't be doing them solo. If you're a Both Feet In student, you get like $150 off. And also if you're a patron, you get 10% off also. And if you're both of those things, you can combine them. So I try to offer, ways that feel good for everybody, but that's the best I can offer for right now. I really believe that this is a steal considering how many sessions are in. And also each session's like an hour 15 minimum, plus there's going to be a Q&A at the end. It's honestly, I think compared to comparable group program offerings I've seen, it's on the lower end already. So please keep that in mind. Thank you for joining me today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And if you have any questions about tension of opposites, just let me know. DM me on Instagram or shoot me an email at natalie@anxiouslovecoach.com, which is still currently my email. It's going to be a while before I change it. All right, everybody. Take care. See you soon. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the Anxious Love Coach today. If you loved this episode, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and maybe share it with someone that you believe might benefit from these perspectives. If you would like to work with me, head on over to my website at anxiouslovecoach.com to explore different tiers of coaching options and online programs. Thanks again for listening, and catch you in the next episode. Have a blessed day.